businessmen: Elon Musk, Walt Disney, Robert House, the Onceler, Henry Ford. What do these men all have in common? They are trying, or tried, to create nation-states to expand their brands. One very interesting example of this is Henry Ford's Fordlandia, a town created with the sole purpose of making vehicle parts. In the 1920s, Ford Motor Company was a majorly successful American vehicle manufacturer. The company's founder, Henry Ford, had such a large business that he controlled the making of all materials used in one of his vehicles. He owned everything from metal factories to lumber mills. But there was one thing that he needed that he did not control: rubber. Ford wanted to cut down on cost by not relying on rubber producers in Asia. Most rubber used for creating tires and car parts was controlled by Great Britain, in what is now modern-day Malaysia. But Ford wanted to become more self-sufficient and began looking for sources of rubber in the Americas. Many places were considered for Ford's rubber plantation, but it was ultimately decided to be in Para, Brazil. Construction began in 1926. By most standards, it was a complete mess. The Brazilian workers were plagued by disease, while the managers of the project were dealing with poor logistics and had no idea how to properly grow rubber trees in the Amazon jungle. Hundreds of acres of forests were destroyed to build the factories and buildings of Fordlandia, which included a sawmill, hospital, and several American-style homes for the workers and managers to live in. The people hired to work on Fordlandia were given homes, clean water, state-of-the-art healthcare, and food. This was more luxurious than the Brazilian workers lived with before, but it came at an uncomfortable cost. There were many strict rules that were enforced in Fordlandia, which include controlled diet of oatmeal, rice, and toast, rules of the cleanliness of houses, ban of alcohol, tobacco, and even sports. Residents of the town had their houses searched by managers to ensure these bizarre rules were followed. I haven't even talked about how awful the heat was. Since it was the dense Amazon forest, it was extremely hot in late morning and early afternoon. But Ford wanted to keep up his American schedule, so work continued in the immense heat. The rules outside of the home were also quite strange, such as the incredibly tight work schedules. Workers were expected to show up at exactly the same time, and if they did not make it work, they couldn't work all day. Why would you stop valuable work being done because of a few minutes of time wasted? Simply a genius business plan only Henry Ford would understand. In the 1930s, due to straining conditions of Fordlandia, many of the workers would start revolts and riots. Most of the frustration came from the rules on food, and one revolt that happened in the town's cafeteria would be known as breaking pans, which would lead to their managers to run off into the jungle. After all of these troubles of heat, schedule, food, etc., the main question was it all worth it? Did the rubber even get made? Well, I don't know if you're aware of this, but the Amazon rainforest is not the safest place in the world. Because of this, it would be so easy for the deadly nature and disease to kill the trees that make the rubber. You know, the whole point of the city, the rubber. Finally, after all of these catastrophes, Fordlandia ended up making Ford Company $0. After the major failure at Fordlandia and the new creation and wide use of synthetic rubber, the Ford Company would leave the town and give it back to the Brazilian government. Although plans were made to keep the town running in the 50s and 70s, the plans fell through and Fordlandia was abandoned. The town remained and remains mostly empty. The only residents are the families of the Brazilian workers that lived there back in the 30s, who lived in many of the abandoned houses. The town is occasionally visited by looters, and the facilities and hospital would be picked clean by scavengers. From 1926 to the 1940s, not a single ounce of rubber used in a Ford car was from Fordlandia. Forests were destroyed, workers were treated poorly, and millions of dollars were wasted. Overall, it was not a fun time. The terrible, idiotic planning of Fordlandia would lead to its own downfall. Perhaps the entrepreneurs of the modern day can learn something from Fordlandia's mistakes. But with the way Elon Musk is running Twitter, or X, I can confidently say, old habits die hard. I hope you enjoyed this exploration of the odd Fordlandia. Remember to subscribe, and that reality is an illusion, the universe is a hologram. Buy gold, bye.